Good morning. We are going to get the press conference started. I'd like to thank you all for attending. This has been a work in progress, and I think you are going to see today, for the first time, a more open discussion about the internal workings of this Bureau than you've seen in the history. So we're not quite where we want to be, but we're moving in the right direction. Change takes time. And with that said, I'm going to bring up Mayor Peduto.
Thank you. So it was nearly 11 months ago that we brought a new police chief to Pittsburgh. In fact, it was the first time ever that we brought a police chief in from the outside. And there were a few reasons that we looked to do that. One was to rebuild the connection between the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police and the community, and the other was to raise the morale within the Bureau by utilizing resources that we presently weren't using. You can't solve old problems with old ways. And the idea that just by simply putting more boots on the ground is not really a solution to being able to solve any crime, and certainly not violent crime. There needs to be new techniques that are brought in, and there needs to be a new team within the Bureau of Police to lead that. In the past 11 months, you've seen not only a new police chief, but an entirely new command staff, and a command staff that's dedicated to using technology, utilizing cooperation with the community, utilizing the resources that we presently have through our officers, and combining them in a new way to address violent crime. That's why we brought Cam McClay to Pittsburgh, and that's what we're going to discuss this morning. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Today is not about me. It's not about me at all. What it's about is the teamwork that's been shown here in Pittsburgh, both with the men and women of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, the communities we work with, our partners, both with other governmental entities, educational entities, community leaders. There are a lot of people in Pittsburgh pulling together to cause some of the great things that are going on to be happening. So I'm excited about this press conference. Some really key points. Again, I want to emphasize one of the main things we needed to do was come together, work as a team behind a single powerful goal. The number one goal for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police for 2015, it was a goal identified by myself and my command staff, was to reduce violent crime and its related disorder. To reduce violent crime and its related disorder. Each unit within the Bureau was tasked with looking at how we do business and ask ourselves, are we performing optimally toward that goal? So we start working together as a cohesive team. So the purpose for this press conference is simple. First, we're going to share with you data. As Sonia said, we're going to be sharing with you a lot of data. You've received copies of a 5-year report analyzing violence in the city of Pittsburgh over a 5-year period between 2010 and 2014. You've got a separate report that analyzes the violence year to date for the first 6 months of 2015, so January 1 through July 30th. First purpose for the press conference is to provide context and perspective to all the violence. We see in the paper, in the media, we hear about it everywhere, people talking about all the violence, but we haven't done as good a job as we could providing context and perspective. So that's what point number one, what this press conference is going to be about. Point number two is we're going to talk about what we're doing about it. There are a lot of things we're doing within the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police and here in Pittsburgh to make a difference, to start reducing crime, fear, and disorder in this community, start reducing violent crime. And I want to take the opportunity to help you to understand that, both from the perspective of our investigations, and you're going to hear from Commander Larry Scarrato, my major crimes commander. You're going to hear from Assistant Chief Scott Schubert talking about how our patrol operations are modifying what we're doing with the idea of bringing everything together to make us more effective in reducing crime. And then thirdly, the purpose for this conference is to share with you some insights into what we're going to be trying to do here in the future to further improve our ability to get data out. And so we'll talk about and share some of those examples. Okay, so you've all received copies of both the 6-month report and the 5-year trend. So in terms of context, what does it mean? Okay, first let's talk about how much violent crime there is. Okay, if you look at the 6-month study, you'll see that the violence, the violent crime this year, violent crime being defined as homicides and shooting crimes predominantly. As you look at those crime trends, you see that our crime this year is roughly on par with our 5-year average. It's down significantly from last year and pretty much on par with a 5-year running average. Now, what's particularly interesting about that to me is as you start looking at other benchmark communities, there are a lot of cities that are showing marked increases here in the post-Ferguson universe. So, you know, the city of Milwaukee seeing an increase of somewhere in the area of 50% thus far this year. You've got St. Louis, New Orleans, Baltimore, looking at approximately a third increase in homicides and shootings. And here we're maintaining steady on our 5-year trend. There's a lot more data in the reports we've given you where you can drill down and take a much closer look, and I urge you to look at that. But we also need to understand the nature of the violent crime here in Pittsburgh. We have to understand the nature in order to be able to most effectively solve it. So who are our victims? Okay, as you look at our report, you're going to see that a vast majority of our homicide victims are young people of color, predominantly African Americans. Dramatic disparity in the impact of violent crime in this community. The vast majority of our victims are young African American men. Where known, you'll also see data that shows that the offenders or actors in those crimes, where known, are predominantly young African American men. Okay. Early in my tenure, I talked about looking toward a model of focused deterrence and how typical this pattern of retaliatory violence between individuals associated with groups of young people can be, and how there is an established best practice methodology to get a handle on that pattern of crime. So as we look at what we're dealing with here, we now have hard data that shows that the pattern that's been seen in other communities is what we're looking at here too. And so it tells me we're on the right track as we start moving towards a model of focused deterrence. One of the other things that's troubling as we look at Pittsburgh and we talk about it as a most livable city, we have to recognize that there are pockets where the quality of life isn't what it could or should be. And as you look in the data there, you're going to see maps that reflect that there are very highly concentrated pockets where this violent crime is occurring. And almost invariably, those pockets, those concentrations of violent crime are also some of our poorest, less advantaged neighborhoods. So we have a trend developing here where we're now having data that's going to help us direct our deployment of our resources and also know where we need to reach to begin to making those community partnerships as we start moving forward to address the violent crime. The punchline here is that here in Pittsburgh, we have far, far more crime than we have criminals. Okay, this is a statistical reality in most communities. It's a statistical reality here. There is a very small subcomponent of our community that are driving the violence. Okay, we know what that looks like. We know who they are. Members of the community know who they are. And now we're moving toward working more closely together using both hard data from our records and the intelligence and insights from the individuals in the community to make sure that we police, we the criminal justice system, are focusing our attention on those who most deserve it, those who are driving the violence within our community. Okay. With that said, I'd like to turn the podium over to Commander Larry Scarato. Again, he's my major crimes commander, and he'll be talking to you about changes in our investigative protocols.
Thank you. Come here. How are you, sir? Thank you. Let me start by saying from the beginning of this conversation that in no way is this conversation meant to blame the victim in our murders or gun violence. This is to address concerns that expose or subject our victims to this violence. And when we start out understanding that, I think it may paint a clear picture to all of how you become or how someone is becoming a target of violence. So what we did is we reviewed data for the past 24 months, and there's a direct correlation between victimology and criminal activity. And in most instances, what we're seeing is that more than 50% of our victims of gun violence or murder can be attributed to retaliation, drug-related instances, and robbery. So, with that, we know that the victim's negative interaction with the criminal element involved in criminal activity or the association of other individuals involved in criminal activity exposes them to great danger. Again, let me say this one more time. We are in no way attempting to blame the victim for the causation. We're simply stating to understand it, you have to understand that the victimology and the correlation that relates to it is relevant. We see that victims under the age of 24 are extreme risks of being either an offender and or a victim. And we talk about the lack of community outrage. And the reality is, it's not the lack of community outrage. The community sees the same thing we see. They see some of these victims as offenders. They see some of these victims involved in activity that is destructive to the community. And what we're asking them to do is to come forward and put their families at risk, knowing that the same people they would be providing information to the police for may be also the same people involved in that violence within their community. So, under the direction of Assistant Chief Marita Bryant, we came up with a realization of how we were going to investigate these crimes, how we are going to be more effective, how we could be more impacting, how we can engage a community to start developing that level of trust within the police bureau. And the level of trust isn't relative to police corruption, theft. The level of trust is, do we have the capacity to keep you safe when you provide us with information? And that's the baseline of where we have to go for our investigation to be as thorough and complete and represent the victims in some of these violent crimes. So, what we did was, first and foremost, we brought in an external search group. It's called the Police Executive Research Forum, and they evaluated all of our practices relative to homicide investigation. That external group gave us real-time evaluation on what we do well, where we're deficient, and what national best practices were. And by bringing in an external organization, it eliminated any of the sensitivity that comes with in an organization relative to how we have operated for decades, and how important that perspective is to become a better investigative unit. We are in the process of reorganizing our homicide unit, and we will call it Violent Crimes Unit, and that will start September 1st of this year. The current homicide unit is staffed with 17 detectives. That will change to 32, so a dramatic increase. Within that unit, they will handle all homicides, all robberies that are business and bank related, and then all aggravated assaults. We're one of the few organizations nationally that has aggravated assault handled operationally in the districts. Most of our victims of gun violence and shootings today are either our victims or offenders in homicides tomorrow. So to have an investigative body within the Bureau handling those investigations is paramount for the success of successful prosecution moving forward. The 6 detectives that are assigned to aggravated assault, or what we will refer to as group violence intervention detectives, those 6 will be led by a sergeant who is responsible for all group-related violence, gun-related, home invasion, robbery, and any of those crimes that we can attribute to groups within our city boundaries. They will have an expertise in how those groups operate, and moving forward, what strategies we will take organizationally to police them. You heard the chief speak to focused deterrence. You know, if you look back at some time, you can go back a few years, you can go back to 2009. Some of you are familiar with PERC and that initiative and what it sounded like, but the reality of it is we weren't as successful with its implementation as we would like to be. That being said, we start speaking to group violence intervention strategy and how that works organizationally from an investigative standpoint and operational standpoint. From the investigation side, no longer are we going to cast a net over an entire neighborhood because of the actions of a few. We recognize that the small number, repeat, very small number of individuals in our communities are creating our violent crime. And the efforts of group violence intervention are to focus on that small number of individuals that drive violence in our communities. The casting net over neighborhoods and enforcing it on everybody does nothing for police-citizen relationships other than create animosity. By directing our attention to those most violent individuals and using every available option that law enforcement, social service has, our external partners, using all of those options to our advantage has the potential to create a dramatic decrease in crime and affect those violent offenders and their actual behaviors. What we do recognize is enforcement efforts are not the only partners in play. It is not a law enforcement only strategy. It's a community police partnership, engaging those individuals that have a moral voice within their own individual communities and taking those options to our most violent offenders and giving them choices to stop the violence, putting them on notice that violence will no longer be tolerated in our communities, and you must stop. I can say it again, violence will be no longer tolerated in our communities, and you must stop. We want to keep you alive. We want to keep you safe. We want to keep you out of jail. To do that, you have to stop the violence. If you do not, then you will receive the full attention of law enforcement. But the message is clear. We prefer you to just stop the violence because it's not tolerated and it no longer will be. So that is our investigative strategy. So for that strategy, there is an operational component. And in that operational component, I will let Assistant Chief Scott Schubert, the Chief of Operations, explain their approach.
Good morning. I don't have the luxury of having the iPad to go over this, so we're going to go old school on this. Operations branch comprises of the 6 zones throughout the city of Pittsburgh. We're the first ones that are there when a call comes in for whether it's a shots fired or a shooting. I think we all learned quickly with our #1 mandate from the Chief of Police, and that's to help reduce violent crime in the city of Pittsburgh. And one of the things that we recognized is that it's not just the responsibility of the investigators, it's a responsibility of the first-year patrolman all the way up to the Chief of Police, that we play a big part in helping to do this, to reduce it. There's a lot of things that the operations branch has been doing all year based on our direction from the chief on his vision. And one of the things that is probably primary for us is coming up with a protocol. We always did things when a person was shot or there was multiple shots fired calls or a house was shot up, but it was done zone to zone. There was no consistency in the level of response on our part. So I'd like to thank the commanders of each zone who've worked hard over the last 6-7 months coming up with a protocol. We could simply put something out and say this is the way you would do it, but it's important for the team to work together because each zone knows their problems, they know what's going on, and working as a group to bring that to fruition that we could all look at and say, work to codify it and say this is how we're going to respond. And what's nice about it, it's got accountability. It's got accountability for each zone commander to ensure we're doing the same thing when violence occurs in the communities. And we come up with the violent crime response and reduction protocol that each zone and the officers are responsible for. And within that response protocol, there's a level 1, level 2, and a level 3. The level 1 is where we have threats, credible threats, that violence is going to occur. And with that level, the zone commander and supervisors are to start immediate action on placing directed patrols in the area that may occur. information sharing with the officers in the zones, or if it crosses jurisdiction zone boundaries, to ensure that everybody's on the same page with it, and working with our intelligence unit to get the information out and to obtain information from them. So it's a huge thing of cooperation and information sharing. Using our discretionary resources, our bicycles, our violence prevention intelligence officers at each zone, and our community resource officers. Getting everybody out, sharing information, and talking to people in the community to try and obtain as much information as possible. A level 2 is an act of violence that has occurred. That could be simply multiple shots fired calls in a community. It could be a house that's shot up. It could be somebody that's shot. It could be somebody that's from an unfortunate victim of a homicide. Of what role we're going to play in that. And that includes everything that we do in level 1 to include conveying an overtime detail if necessary, putting additional resources off, getting resources from other zones. Zone 1 was having some violence issues last week, and we sent a car from each zone between the hours of 4 p.m. and 8 o'clock in the morning for the full week to help enhance the protocol they had in place to address the violence. So we know we're in this together. This is a team effort. This isn't just a zone. We understand that everything, even though it's in Zone 1, it's all of us. We're Pittsburgh Police. We're not just simply Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3. Getting out with the community engagement, reaching out to the stakeholders, reaching out and convening meetings, if necessary, with the community to get input from them. We realize that the first 28 to 48 hours is critical after a violent crime occurs. And getting our officers out there on that street, going door to door, talking to the residents, trying to calm their fears, letting them know that this matters, that it's simply not us taking a report and turning it over to investigations, that we're actually out there trying to make a difference and trying to prevent things from occurring. Giving them information, tips, how to report things. A lot of times people don't come forward when a crime first occurs, but a day or two later may be willing to give information or give their contact information so we can turn it over to the violent crime unit. Coming up with media releases that can assist with non-investigatory issues to get the information out that way. Working with our group violence intervention team and requesting additional resources, as I told you, with Zone 1. The third level that we get to is an act of violence, an act or acts of violence to continually cause fear, community harm, and there is actionable intelligence that suggests violence is retaliatory in nature and that we expect more violence to occur. That's our top level. That's all hands on deck coming out and working on it. That's the commander of the zone putting together an operational plan for what's occurring and how that commander is going to put it out there to address the issue, keep people safe, work with the violent crime unit, the group violence intervention team, requesting additional resources, and not just from within the Pittsburgh Police, but external partners as well, whether it's the state police, the county police, the sheriff, probation and parole, DEA, ATF, FBI, it doesn't matter. It's taking that coordinated effort and putting everything together and then developing a pre-planned media release that goes out through our PIO to get the information out there. So as you can see, it's a whole team concept and there's accountability. It's not just words. It's more than words. It's action. It's accountability. So that's one of the things that we're doing. Another thing that we did is we took our current 90 cars and our 99 cars, regardless of what their description was of what their duties were, we put them together, and the commanders worked on that for about 7 months on what that looked like. And that's for our violent prevention and intelligence officers. They are our subject matter experts in the zones. They know who the players are, they know who the shooters are, they know who the ones that are getting arrested for guns, they know who they're the ones that are in gangs, They're the ones that are dealing drugs. They're all connected to the violence. They're sharing information with the officers in each zone. They're sharing information with the detectives. They're sharing information with the group violent intervention team. They're working together. They're working zone to zone. We have the officers from Zone 2 helping Zone 1, Zone 1 helping Zone 2. I just saw a few weeks ago, Zone 2, which is downtown, was over in Beachview, assisting the 90 car with there, and they made several drug arrests over there. That's what it's all about. It's not about territory anymore of zone to zone. This is a team concept, and we're going to do everything we can to ensure that we respond to all violent crime and do everything we can to prevent it from occurring. So that's where we're at, and I can tell you with all honesty, over the last several weeks, it's been refreshing to see the zone commanders, every time there's a violent act, sending their information in on what they're doing in their zones and the information sharing that they're putting out there. So it's coming into play, it's working well, it's getting the information out there, and it's holding them accountable for what's going on in their zones, and it's holding us accountable for what's going on in our city. So thank you very much.
So in conclusion, I think as you see, there's a lot of cool things happening. When I was hired, I was hired to do a few very, very specific things. I talked about them when I was walking in the door. Number one, implemented data-driven policing, and implementing it in such a way that we use it to drive our operations, that we use intelligence to drive our investigations, and that we have that community component involved in that process as well. That we are going to try to improve our analytical capacity. I think you see, with what you see here, I think we're making strides. At this point, I'd be remiss if I didn't extend a deeply felt thanks to Allegheny County Human Services Director Mark Cherna and Deputy Director Aaron Dalton, who has kind of been our quiet mentor, teaching us how to improve our analytical capacity. So there's a lot of really good things happening there as well. And you'll see up here on the display charts and on the website, if you go look, we're looking to put out visual displays, interactive visual displays of all of the data we're going to be pushing out. So this data will be downloadable, it'll be searchable, and as you manipulate the variables, it will change the displays that you're looking at. So we're looking for a lot more visibility of that data, and I'm excited at the pace at which that's coming. I've committed to implementing the best practices of policing, treating ourselves as professionals, always looking at what we do, how we do it, and how can we do it better, and using and building community trust as we're doing all of this important work. What I'm hoping you got from this is that you see the Bureau of Police command staff, the Bureau of Police men and women, they're all in. We get this, we want this, we've adopted this as our predominant goal, and I'm excited about where we're going to be going in the future. Again, please do take the opportunity to go look at the website, come up and look at the visual displays there. I'm told they're not fully interactive yet, but we're going to be continually working here in the next week or two to try to get those to where you'll be able to manipulate the data. So at this point, I'd just like to conclude by saying we're doing a lot of things here to try to improve our game. This is a criminal justice system-wide effort. We've got great support from our prosecuting attorneys, both county and federal. We've got great partnerships with other agencies here in Pittsburgh. But I'm here to tell you that the criminal justice system cannot fix this problem. Okay, this is a community challenge. There are subcultures of violence that are driving this community problem, and so all of this will be in vain if the community doesn't continue to work with us. At this point, one of the things I'm most excited about is the level of positive engagement and dialogue as I go to various community meetings. The mantra, the consistent theme is always, excuse me, Chief, what do you need and how can we help you? And so I'm seeing here in Pittsburgh a lot of great things happen. Neighborhoods are pulling together. People are reaching out to me, to my command staff, asking how they can help. And here in Pittsburgh, I'm confident that we're going to do some great things. These are difficult times. These are trying problems, but they're not insurmountable.